I'll be right with you, folks. Let me tell you now, Menelaus, I don't blame you for wanting your wife Helen back. I mean, personally, I think running off with somebody else's wife and starting a war is crossing the line. But you do need to face the facts. She's been in Troy now for the past 7 years, and you haven't heard anything that indicates she's unhappy. But if you're truly determined to win her back, I suggest that you write her a heartfelt letter. It's simple, really. Why don't you start out like this? Dear Helen, when I had you to myself, I was a fool because I treated you as if I didn't want you around. You truly are the face that launched 1,000 ships, and those pretty faces of yours always made you stand out in a crowd. But ever since Prince Paris swooped into Greece and picked you from the bunch, I've been devastated. It all happened so fast, as if one glance was all it took. He stole you away from me, and now that you're in Troy, it's much too late for me to even take a second look. I must say that trying to live without your love has been like one long sleepless night. Let me show you, my dear wife, that I now know wrong from right. When I think of every Trojan street you walk on, I long to be following the girl whom I'm forced to remember that I once treated as if I didn't even want around. Oh, Helen, baby, give me one more chance to show you that I love you. I'm serious. Oh, darling, please let me back in your heart. I realize now that I was blind to let you go. But now, since I've seen you in his arms, I want you back. And just sign it, All My Love, Menelaus. See? What did I tell you? It's easy as ABC. In the 1997 film Titanic, director James Cameron featured Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet as a pair of young lovers who share one night of passion before they are tragically ripped apart from one another forever. He also used one of the greatest historical events as his backdrop for this love story. In Troilus and Cressida, Shakespeare features the title characters who are also separated after they share one night of passion, and he uses the Trojan War as the backdrop for his love story. Coincidence? I think not. So let's take a look at the plot. The play opens with a prologue explaining the background of the plot, which takes place 7 years into the Trojan Wars. It started when Trojan Prince Paris stole the beautiful Helen from her husband King Menelaus and carried her back home to Troy with him. Menelaus gathered his fellow Greek kings, and they sailed to Troy in order to capture the city and reclaim Helen. Also, within the walls of Troy, Prince Troilus complains to Pandarus that he is unable to fight because he's desperately in love with Pandarus's niece Cressida. Pandarus complains that he's been doing his best to further Troilus's pursuit of his niece. The Trojan commander Aeneas comes in, bringing news that Paris has been wounded in combat with Menelaus, and Troilus agrees to join the Trojan comrades on the field. In another part of the city, Cressida is joined by her uncle Pandarus, and they discuss the Trojan princes. Pandarus praises Troilus as a greater man than Hector. As they converse, several Trojan lords pass them by, returning from battle, including Antenor, Aeneas, Hector, and Paris. Pandarus admires each one, but tells his niece that none of them can match Troilus. He then leaves Cressida and promises to bring her a token from Troilus. While she is alone, Cressida admits that while she returns Troilus's feelings, she's holding him off because she's enjoying his pursuit of her. Meanwhile, in the Greek camp, the great general and king Agamemnon is speaking with his lieutenants and fellow kings. He asks why they seem so glum and downcast, for although their 7-year siege of Troy has met with little success so far, they should welcome the adversity that the long war represents, since only in difficult times can greatness emerge. Nestor, the oldest of the Greek commanders, gives examples of how heroism emerges from hardship. Ulysses points out that the Greek army is facing a crisis because of a breakdown in authority within the Greek camp. Instead of being united, they're divided into factions. Achilles refuses to fight and instead stays in his tent, while Patroclus, Ajax, and his foul-mouthed slave Thersites ridicule the Greek commanders, and so the entire army is corrupted. During the discussions, Aeneas appears under a flag of truce and brings a challenge from Hector. The Trojan prince offers to fight any Greek lord in single combat with the honor of their respective wives as the issue. The Greeks agree to find a champion and offer Aeneas hospitality. As Aeneas is led away, Ulysses tells Nestor that this challenge is truly directed at Achilles, since only Achilles could match great Hector in battle. But having Achilles fight Hector is dangerous because if Achilles loses, it would dishearten the entire army. Therefore, Ulysses suggests that they have Ajax fight Hector instead. Even if Ajax loses, they can still claim that Achilles would have won in his place. At the same time, by choosing Ajax as their champion, they know that this will infuriate Achilles and perhaps goad him into rejoining the war and bringing all of his soldiers with him. Nestor is impressed by Ulysses' intelligence and agrees to the plan. In the Greek camp, Ajax summons his slave Thersites and orders him to find out the nature of the proclamation that's just been posted. Thersites is a scurvy, foul-mouthed ruffian who refuses to obey Ajax and curses him and the other Greeks, provoking Ajax to beat him. Achilles and Patroclus break up the fight and Thersites curses them too. He also implies that Achilles and Patroclus are lovers. They send him away and Achilles tells Ajax the news of Hector's challenge to any brave Greek warrior. The selection of the warrior has been put to a lottery. Otherwise, Achilles says that he would be the only possible choice. In Troy, King Priam and his sons debate whether or not they should continue the war when they can end it by returning Helen to the Greeks. Hector argues that while the theft of Helen may have been a brave act, she can't be worth the great and bloody price they've been paying to keep her. When he's done speaking, his sister Cassandra, a mad prophetess, warns that if they do not let Helen go, Troy will burn. Troilus dismisses her warnings and rantings and argues that they must keep Helen for the sake of their honor, and naturally Paris supports him. Hector replies that this is why young men cannot be trusted to make moral decisions, since passion overwhelms their reason. But Troilus says that Helen is more than a woman. She's a theme of honor and renown, and eventually Hector agrees to continue the war. He goes on to report that his challenge has been sent out to the Greeks, and he hopes that it will bring Achilles to the field. When Achilles sees that the Greek commanders Agamemnon, Ulysses, Nestor, and Diomedes are approaching accompanied by Ajax, he quickly retires to his tent. When Agamemnon asks to see him, Patroclus tells the general that Achilles is ill. Agamemnon grows angry, but Achilles refuses to emerge and tells Ulysses that he's still refusing to fight the Trojans. Ulysses and the other Greek commanders praise Ajax profusely, saying that he's the best of their warriors. They agree to leave Achilles in his tent and decide that Ajax will be their champion against Hector the next day. Meanwhile in Troy, Pander speaks with Paris and Helen. He compliments Helen profusely and asks her to excuse Troilus if Priam asks about him at dinner that night. Paris and Helen ask where Troilus will be dining, and Pandarus refuses to tell them. However, they both guess that he'll be with Cressida, and they make bawdy jokes as they depart to greet the returning warriors. When Pandarus finds Troilus pacing about impatiently, he brings in Cressida and urges them to embrace. Once Pandarus departs, they profess their love for one another and each pledge to be faithful to the other. He reassures her and again pledges to be faithful, declaring that thereafter history will say of all lovers that they were as true as Troilus. Cressida declares that if she ever strays from him, she hopes that people will say of false lovers that they were as false as Cressida. Pandarus declares that if ever the pair prove false, may all pitiful goers between be referred to as panders after him. Meanwhile, in the Greek encampment, Cressida's father Calchas has defected from Troy and joined the Greeks. He asks the Greek general Agamemnon to grant him a favor and exchange the Trojan commander Antenor for his daughter so that they might be reunited. Agamemnon agrees and orders Diomedes to oversee the exchange. On Ulysses' advice, the Greek commanders then file past Ulysses' tent and snub the proud warrior, ignoring his greetings and making him feel uneasy. He goes to Ulysses and asks him why he's being scorned. Ulysses tells him that he is no longer a hero and that he'll soon be forgotten. He implies that Achilles could restore his fame and honor if he stopped cozying up to enemy women and took to the field. When Ulysses is gone, Patroclus encourages Achilles to follow Ulysses' advice, and realizing that his reputation is at stake, Achilles agrees. Meanwhile, Diomedes goes to Troy to exchange Antenor for Cressida, and he's greeted heartily by Aeneas and Paris. Aeneas goes to fetch Cressida and says that this exchange will deal a heavy blow to Troilus. Paris agrees, but says regretfully that they have no choice. After Aeneas is gone, Paris asks Diomedes who he thinks deserves Helen more, Paris or Menelaus. With great bitterness, Diomedes replies that they both deserve her, since they are both fools who are willing to pay a great price in blood for a whore. As the day dawns, Troilus takes a regretful leave of Cressida, while she pleads with him to stay a little longer. Pandarus comes in and teases them about their recent lovemaking, but suddenly there is a knock at the door and Cressida hides Troilus in her bedroom. Aeneas enters and tells Paris that Cressida must be sent to her father in the Greek camp. The young prince is distraught, and Pandarus breaks the news to Cressida, who begins weeping uncontrollably. Troilus says goodbye to his lady. When they're alone, Troilus pledges to be faithful, and Cressida promises that even in the Greek camp, she will remain true to him. When Diomedes comes in, Troilus demands that he uses her well. Diomedes says that he will make no promises and will treat her as well as Cressida deserves. Just then, a trumpet sounds calling them all to the Greek camp for the duel between Hector and Ajax. In the Greek camp, the newly arrived Cressida is greeted by all the Greek commanders. Ulysses insists that she be kissed by everyone. However, he doesn't kiss her himself because he considers her a loose and unvirtuous woman. As the Trojan lords arrive, the duel is set by Aeneas, who remarks that since Ajax and Hector are related, Hector's whole heart will not be in this fight. As Achilles boasts to Patroclus how he will kill Hector, Thersites delivers a letter to Achilles and then unloads abuse on them, calling Patroclus Achilles' male varlet and masculine whore. The letter is from the Trojan princess Polyxena, whom Achilles loves, and it begs him not to fight the next day. He tells Patroclus sadly that he will obey her wishes. Diomedes slips off to see Cressida, and Ulysses and Troilus follow him. Believing Diomedes to be an untrustworthy and lustful rogue, Thersites follows him as well. At Calchas' tent, Diomedes calls on Cressida. Her father fetches her while Troilus and Ulysses watch from one hiding place and Thersites watches from another. Diomedes woos Cressida, who behaves reluctantly but coyly towards his advances, fending him off for a time, but never allowing him to leave. Eventually, she gives him a sleeve that Troilus presented to her as a token of love. Then she takes it back and says she never wants to see Diomedes again. However, she soon softens and gives it back to him, promising to wait for him later when he comes back to sleep with her. Troilus is shocked and in agony and pledges to look for Diomedes the next day in battle and kill him. Finally, as morning nears, Aeneas arrives and leads him back to Troy. As Hector prepares for battle, his wife Andromache and his sister Cassandra plead for him not to go. Both of them have had dreams that prophesize his death. However, he dismisses their warnings. Troilus comes in and says that he will be fighting too, and chides Hector for having been too merciful to his enemies in the past. Troilus boasts that he plans to slay as many men as he can. Cassandra brings in Priam, and he also urges Hector not to fight, but Hector refuses to listen and goes out to the battlefield. Pandarus brings Troilus a letter from Cressida, but he tears it up and follows Hector out to the field. During the battle, Agamemnon realizes that the Greeks are doing badly and believes that Patroclus has been slain. Enraged by the news, Achilles decides to look for Hector. However, Hector decides to spare the unprepared Achilles. At the same time, Hector sees a Greek in impressive armor and pursues him for it. Meanwhile, Achilles and his men, the Myrmidons, find Hector, who's taken off his armor in order to try on the golden armor of the warrior he's just conquered. And even though Hector says that he's unarmed, Achilles instructs all of the Myrmidons to stab him to death. As Agamemnon, Ajax, Menelaus, Nestor, Diomedes, and others are marching, word reaches them of Hector's death. Troilus is beside himself with grief and informs the Trojans of Hector's death. He also curses Pandarus, who's then alone on stage, whining that he's been abused, and says that he will soon die and bequeath the audience all of his diseases. When we return, we'll look at some of the many characters in Troilus and Cressida. Many people consider Troilus and Cressida to be a problem play, me included, and for two very good reasons. First of all, it's not really clear if this is supposed to be a history play, a tragedy, or a comedy. And second, there really aren't a lot of very likable characters in this play. But let's look at some of the most important ones. Troilus is a young Trojan and one of the many sons of Priam. He's in love with a young woman named Cressida, even though he doesn't really seem to know her very well. Troilus uses his friendship with Pandarus, Cressida's creepy uncle, to bring the two of them together. Since Cressida's father Calchas has defected to the Greek side of the Trojan War, Pandarus seems to have been left in charge of her care, and her father couldn't have made a worse choice. He acts like a pimp and brings the unmarried couple together and provides them with a bedchamber. Cressida does not seem to have many redeeming qualities. The morning after they sleep together, she's whisked away as a pawn of war to be reunited with her father in the Greek camp. Not long after that, she forgets her vows of fidelity to Troilus and seems content to be the concubine of Diomedes, who is sometimes called Diomed and seems fairly ambivalent towards her. Hector is another son of Priam and Troilus' older brother. He's one of the only honorable characters in the entire play, and also the most powerful warrior general in the Trojan army. Menelaus is the Greek husband of Helen, who has either been stolen away or ran away with the Trojan prince Paris, thus igniting the Trojan War, which has been going on for the past 7 years when the play begins. Paris is also another son of Priam. The Greek camp is filled with many boring kings and leaders, including Ulysses, Agamemnon, Nestor, Menelaus, and Ajax. Achilles is the strongest Greek warrior, but he's given up fighting to lie around with his male companion Patroclus. And finally, we have Thersites, the scurvy Greek servant/slave of Ajax. When I first watched this play, I really disliked Thersites because he's just a very disgusting character. However, the more I've watched it, the more I've come to appreciate that he's supposed to be a cynic and one of the most honest characters in the entire play. He doesn't like any of the other characters, including the ones he serves, and with good reason. They're all very despicable. He's an equal opportunity abuser, and he calls them all fools. And like Feste the Jester in Twelfth Night, Thersites is permitted to speak his mind without censure. When we return, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes in Troilus and Cressida. In this play, Shakespeare used some of his most tried and true plot devices. First, we have the prophecies of Mad Cassandra, who urges the Trojans to return Helen to the Greeks, or Troy will burn for it. We also have Andromache's dream that her husband Hector will be killed in battle the next day, and of course he is because he ignores her dream. There's also Cressida's promise that she will be faithful or become a cliché and symbol of falsehood. Another very powerful plot device in this play is the father deciding with whom his daughter is going to wind up. Calchas doesn't even know that she's in love with Troilus, and that doesn't seem to even be a consideration to him. He wants Cressida with him, and that means leaving behind the man she loves and becoming the mistress to Diomedes, whether she likes it or not. And finally, Shakespeare also uses love tokens for separating lovers. In this case, Troilus gives Cressida a sleeve to remember him by, and she gives Troilus a glove of hers. As far as memorable scenes go, let's just take a look at 3. First, in Act 3, Scene 2, there's a memorable scene in which we hear Troilus promise to be true, Cressida promise to be faithful, and Pandarus declare that all sexual go-betweens should be named after him if they break their vows. Well, I guess 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Troilus starts off, "True swains in love shall in the world to come approve their truths by Troilus, when their rhymes, full of protest, of oath, and big compare want similes, truth tired with iteration, as true as steel, as plantage to the moon, as sun to day, as turtle to her mate, as iron to adamant, as earth to the center, yet after all comparisons of truth, as truth's authentic author to be cited, as true as Troilus, shall crown up the verse and sanctify the numbers." And Cressida responds, "Prophet may you be, if I be false or swerve a hair from truth, when time is old and hath forgot itself, when water drops have worn the stones of Troy, and blind oblivion swallowed cities up, and mighty states characterless are graded to dusty nothing, yet let memory from false to false among false maids in love upbraid my falsehood, when they've said as false as air, as water, wind, or sandy earth, as fox to lamb, as wolf to heifer's calf, pard to the hind, or stepdame to her son, yea, let them say to stick the heart of falsehood as false as Cressida." And Pandarus finishes by saying, "Go to, a bargain made, seal it, seal it. I'll be the witness. Here I hold your hand. Here, my cousins. If ever you prove false one to another, since I have taken such pains to bring you together, let all pitiful goers between be called to the world's end after my name. Call them all Pandars. Let all constant men be Troiluses, all false women Cressids, and all brokers between Pandars." Next, in Act 5, Scene 2, Troilus and Ulysses see Cressida and Diomedes as he slowly wins her over to be his concubine. From another angle, Thersites also looks on and scorns them both. It's in this moment that Troilus gives up on Cressida's love. And finally, in Act 5, Scene 8, we see that after Hector has spared Achilles' life when he was out of breath, Achilles does not reciprocate, but instead has his myrmidons surround the unarmed Hector and beat and stab him to death. Were that not enough, he also has his body tied to his horse's tail to be paraded through the camps as further denigration and humiliation to his foe and to demoralize the surviving enemies. When we return, we'll look at some of the major themes running through Troilus and Cressida. There are many different themes in this play to choose from, so let's just start with irresponsibility. It was completely irresponsible of Paris to steal Menelaus's wife Helen. Whether or not Helen wanted to come with him of her own free will, or she was forced, she doesn't seem to have any interest in going back to her husband. Why the man would want to fight over her in the first place is beyond me. It must be because of principle. Achilles won't fight because he promised Polyxena, one of the daughters of Hecuba, that he wouldn't. However, he comes out of retirement when his masculine whore, as Thucydides calls him, Troilus, is killed in battle. So why does he kill Hector? No one said that Hector killed him. Again, this must be because of principle. It was completely irresponsible of Cressida's father, Calchas, to send for his daughter and then give her away to be Diomedes' mistress. Of course, it was also irresponsible of him to leave her in the care of Pandarus after he defected to the Greeks. You can argue that Cressida was a casualty of war, but she certainly didn't fight very long and hard to hold on to her faithfulness once she got into the Greek camp. She's passed from man to man, and they take turns kissing her, and she doesn't seem to protest very much either. It's almost as if she's discovered that this is going to be a means of self-preservation for her. Perhaps this is why she gives in to Diomedes after just a little bit of flirtatious protestations. As you examine this play, you're bound to ask yourselves questions about the morality and sense of a prolonged war. Cressida is a casualty of war that was caused by Helen, who is another casualty of war. But while Helen is a subject, a cause, and a theme, Cressida is merely a woman exchanged for only one prisoner. I've looked over numerous performances of Troilus and Cressida, and in every version, neither Helen nor Cressida is depicted as a raving beauty. It really makes you wonder what all the fighting was for. Paris makes everyone pay the price for his selfishness, just like Henry VIII did, although at least Paris was willing to hold on to her for 7 years. Anne Boleyn only got 3 before she was beheaded. We should also put Edward III in this category, who became infatuated over the Countess of Salisbury, even though both of them were married. Fortunately, he came to his senses when confronted with his valiant son's conquests and war. You really get a sense of this play from listening to the prologue. It's very different from the enthusiastic chorus at the beginning of Henry V, the inviting introduction by Gower at the beginning of Pericles, Prince of Tyre, or the bittersweet preface from Chorus in Romeo and Juliet. In Troy, there lies the scene. From isles of Greece, the Princess Orgulus, their high blood chafed, have to the port of Athens sent their ships, fraught with the ministers and instruments of cruel war. 69 that wore their cronets regal, from the Athenian bay put forth towards Phrygia, and their vow is made to ransack Troy, within whose strong immures the ravished Helen, Menelaus's queen, with wanton Paris sleeps. And that's the quarrel. It later continues, and hither am I come, a prologue armed, but not in confidence of author's pen or actor's voice, but suited in like conditions as our argument to tell you, fair beholders, that our play leaps o'er the vaunt and firstlings of these broils, beginning in the middle, starting thence away to what may be digested in a play. Like or find fault, do as your pleasures are. Now, good or bad, 'tis but the chance of war. In other words, these people have been at war for the past 7 years. They're tired, I'm tired, and by the end of this play, you'll be tired of them as well. If nothing else, it does set the tone for a dreary play about the futility of a long, drawn-out war. But if you think the prologue is obnoxious and offensive, wait till you hear the epilogue. I'm only going to share the end of it from Act 5, Scene 10, in which Pandarus says, "Good traders in the flesh, set this in your painted cloths, As many as be here of Pandar's hall, your eyes half out, weep at Pandar's fall. Or if you cannot weep, yet give some groans, though not for me, yet for your aching bones. Brethren and sisters of the whole door trade, some 2 months hence my will shall here be made. It should be now, but that my fear is this, some galled goose of Winchester would hiss. Till then, I'll sweat and seek about for eases, and at that time bequeath you my diseases. As I said, this is an unpopular play about an unpopular woman who is causing an unpopular war. If you feel dissatisfied with the ending, join the club. When we return, we'll look at some of the most powerful lines from Troilus and Cressida. As I said earlier, sometimes this play is categorized as a comedy and other times as a tragedy. But let's take a look at some of the comedy in the play first. There's a great exchange in Act 2, Scene 1 between the dim-witted Ajax and his scurvy slave Thersites as they trade insults when Thersites ignores Ajax's calls. After Ajax strikes Thersites, he responds, "The plague of Greece upon thee, thou mongrel beef-witted lord." Ajax replies, saying, "Speak then, thou vinurus leaven, speak. I will beat thee into handsomeness." I love that line. But Thersites gets in a great reply. "I shall sooner rail thee into wit and holiness, but I think thy horse will sooner con an oration than thou learn a prayer without a book." You've got to give it to Thersites, though. He may be a slave, but he doesn't take abuse from a fool. And in Act 2, Scene 3, Thersites once again sums up the entire conflict with his most cynical and honest opinion about all these kings who have been spending 7 years in a standoff battle because one of their peers decided to help himself to somebody else's wife. Thersites says, "Here is such patchery, such juggling, and such knavery. All the argument is a cuckold and a whore, a good quarrel to draw emulous factions and bleed to death upon. Now thy dry Serbigo on the subject, and war and lechery confound all." In Act 1, Scene 2, we hear Cressida utter some of the truest and wisest words in the entire play. Words, vows, gifts, tears, and love's full sacrifice he offers in another's enterprise. But more in Troilus thousandfold I see than in the glass of Pandar's praise may be. Yet hold I off. Women are angels wooing. Things won are done. Joy's soul lies in the doing. That she beloved knows not, that knows not this. Men prize the thing ungained more than it is. That she was never yet, that ever knew love, got so sweet as when desire did sue. Therefore this maxim out of love I teach. Achievement is command, ungained beseech. Then, though my heart's content firm love doth bear, nothing of that shall from my eyes appear. It's a shame that this woman doesn't take her own advice. And in Act 4, Scene 1, we hear some of my favorite dialogue in the entire play when Paris makes the mistake of asking Diomedes his opinion of the situation with Helen. Paris asks, "And tell me, noble Diomed, faith, tell me true, even in the soul of sound good fellowship, who in your thoughts merits fair Helen best, myself or Menelaus?" Diomedes responds, "Both alike. He merits well to have her that does seek her, not making any scruple of her soilure, with such a hell of pain or world of charge, and you as well to keep her, that defend her, not palating the taste of her dishonor, with such costly loss of wealth and friends. He, like a puling cuckold, would drink up the lees and dregs of a flat-tamed piece. You, like a lecher out of whorish loins, are pleased to breed out your inheritors. Both merits poised, Each weighs no less nor more, but he is he the heavier for a whore. Paris awkwardly replies, "You are too bitter to your countrywoman." And Diomedes tells it like it is, saying, "She's bitter to her country. Hear me, Paris. For every false drop in her bawdy veins a Grecian life hath sunk. For every scruple of her contaminated carrion weight a Trojan hath been slain. Since she could speak, she hath not given so many good words breath, as for her Greeks and Trojans suffered death." It really speaks to the selfishness of Paris's actions by taking a woman who didn't belong to him and who has disgraced her country. When we return, we'll look at some of the major turning points in Troilus and Cressida and compare it to some of the correlations in other Shakespeare plays. Let's take a look at three major turning points in this play. First, we have Act 3, Scene 3, when Calchas asks the Greeks to trade the captured Antenor for his daughter Cressida, unaware that he's creating much unhappiness for Troilus and Cressida and destroying their chance to have a happy life together. Next, we have the death of Patroclus, which becomes Achilles' eventual motivation to go back into battle and to avenge his death, specifically against Hector, even though there's no evidence that Hector was the one who killed Patroclus. And finally, in Act 5, Scene 9, when Hector dies in battle, we know that the Trojans are doomed to failure. This is actually the turning point for the entire Trojan War. It also demonstrates that while Hector fought honorably, Achilles took the first opportunity to kill Hector when he was unarmed and surrounded by the Myrmidons. He also treated Hector's body shamefully by trailing the carcass behind his horse and dragging it through the camps. There are also some interesting correlations in Troilus and Cressida to some of Shakespeare's other plays. Like Romeo and Juliet and Antony and Cleopatra, all three couples have their loves doomed by circumstances beyond their control and outside factions. Troilus and Cressida spend one night of passion together, and then they are pulled apart from each other because her father makes arrangements for her to be with Diomedes. In Romeo and Juliet, the newlywed couple spend one night of passion together, and then the next morning they're separated after he's banished and her father makes arrangements for his daughter to marry the County Paris. Even though Hector and Ajax agree to a single battle between the two of them, it never comes to fruition when they realize that they are actually cousins and related by blood. In Richard II, Henry Bolingbroke and Thomas Mowbray agreed to single combat with one another, but at the last minute, King Richard calls it off and banishes the two of them. In Henry IV, Part 1, Hal attempts to challenge Hotspur to single battle between the two of them, but Hotspur doesn't get the message from his uncle. In Antony and Cleopatra, Mark Antony challenges Octavius Caesar to single combat, but Caesar is wise enough not to accept that challenge. Ulysses keeps urging Troilus to stay silent when they're eavesdropping on Cressida and Diomedes in her tent. However, despite how many times he agrees, he keeps breaking his word and keeps talking out of frustration. In Twelfth Night, Fabian has to continuously remind Sir Toby Belch to hold his tongue when they are watching Malvolio read Maria's forged letter, leading him to believe that Olivia's in love with him. Diomedes wears Troilus' sleeve in his helmet to draw out his enemy in battle. This is much like Michael Williams, the soldier in Henry V, who wears Hal's glove in his helmet to draw out Hal, even though he doesn't realize that he's really the king. Hector's wife Andromache tells him not to go into battle because she's had a dream the night before that he's going to die, but he ignores her advice along with his sister Cassandra and his father Priam's insistence and dies in battle. In Julius Caesar, Caesar's wife Calpurnia tells him not to go to the Senate because she's had a dream the night before that he's going to die, but he ignores her advice and the soothsayer's warning and goes anyway and is stabbed to death. Also, Andromache pleads on her knees for Hector not to go into battle, but he still does. In Coriolanus, Virgilia, Volumina, and their neighbors successfully plead on their knees for Coriolanus not to sack Rome. In Titus Andronicus, Marcius, Marcus, and young Marcius all plead on their knees to allow Titus Andronicus' son to be buried with honors, and they are successful. In Richard II, the Duchess of York pleads on her knees for Henry IV to spare her son O'Merle, and she is successful. And in Measure for Measure, Mariana employs Isabella to plead on her knees with her to the Duke for Angelo's pardon. And finally, in Troilus and Cressida, we see the death of the heroic and superior military general Hector when he is unarmed, drastically outnumbered, and cowardly slain by the Myrmidons at the instructions of Achilles, signaling the inevitable defeat of the Trojan army. In Henry VI, Part 1, we see the death of the heroic and superior military leader Sir John Talbot when he's drastically outnumbered, signaling his army's last chance for success. In Henry VI, Part 3, we see the death of the heroic and superior military warrior, the Earl of Warwick, when he's killed in single combat against Edward IV, signaling Henry VI's last chance for success. When we return, we'll look at some interesting facts from Troilus and Cressida. In preparing to do this episode, I did some research, and this is what I found. Troilus and Cressida is Shakespeare's third longest play and faithfully follows the plot line of the Iliad. And while it certainly isn't his best, it is recognized for its highly philosophical tone and learned vocabulary. As I thought about it, Troilus and Cressida is among my least favorite Shakespeare plays, along with Titus Andronicus and Timon of Athens. At first I thought maybe Shakespeare should have skipped plays that began with the letter T, but then we wouldn't have The Tempest, Twelfth Night, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, The Two Noble Kinsmen, and The Taming of the Shrew, and that still wouldn't solve the problem of Coriolanus, which starts with a C. Oh well, I guess you just have to learn to take the good with the bad. At the time it was written, the names Troilus and Cressida were recognized as much of a cliché couple for Shakespeare's audience as Romeo and Juliet are for us today. Interestingly enough, the character of Pander is referenced in Hamlet, Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and Much Ado About Nothing, and Troilus and Cressida is referenced by Feste in Twelfth Night and Lorenzo in The Merchant of Venice, while Petruchio's spaniel in The Taming of the Shrew is named Troilus. It's also been conjectured that Shakespeare wrote Troilus and Cressida for a private performance. In the 1609 Quattro, an epistle was added claiming that it was a new play never sailed with the stage. In fact, the first verified performance of this play was not until 1898 in Germany, and even that was heavily adapted. In the 1669 Quattro, it's described as a history play. In the 1623 First Folio, it's listed as a tragedy, and in the BBC DVD collection, it appears at the end of the comedy collection right after Much Ado About Nothing. Many consider Troilus and Cressida to be a dark comedy or a problem play, along with All's Well That Ends Well, Measure for Measure, and Hamlet, because of its cynical questioning of noble and heroic ideals. However, I don't have a problem with any of those other plays. My main problems with Troilus and Cressida are that I really just don't like any of the characters, and it doesn't have a very satisfying ending. I believe part of my dissatisfaction stems from the fact that this play takes place between the 13th and 12th century BC. As a result, there is no Christianity, the title characters are unmarried, and Paris demonstrates a blatant disrespect for marriage vows, honor, and virtue. The play also prompts many questions. First, if Paris took Helen because the Greeks kept his aunt, why didn't they just trade the aunt back for Helen? Second, if the Trojans wanted Antenor back, why didn't they give Helen back for Antenor instead of asking for Cressida? Third, if Troilus wanted to be with Cressida, why didn't he just go with her to the Greeks? He had plenty of complimentary things to say about them when Cressida was leaving, and her father was already there. And fourth, if Achilles was in love with the daughter of Hecuba, Why didn't they just trade Antenor for her? Because none of these questions are answered, I believe that's what legitimately classifies this play as a problem play. Sheena Easton's 1984 song Strut contains the lyrics, "Nations go to war over women like you. It's just a form of appreciation." Gee, I wonder where that inspiration came from. And finally, in Act 2, Scene 2, Hector likens Paris and Troilus to the young men, quote, whom Aristotle thought unfit to hear moral philosophy, unquote. Aristotle was born in 384 BC, about 1100 years after this play takes place. Oh well, as Pandarus says, hey ho. When we return, we'll look at some of the great actors in the 1981 BBC Shakespeare version of Troilus and Cressida. All right, now let's take a look at some of the actors in the 1981 BBC Shakespeare version of Troilus and Cressida. Anton Lesser, who plays Troilus, also played Edgar in King Lear in 1982, Feste the Jester in 1988 in the Kenneth Branagh version of Twelfth Night, Sir Thomas More in the Wolf Hall series, and Exeter in The Hollow Crown. Merlina Kendall, who plays Andromache, also played Amelia in The Winter's Tale, also in 1981, and Lady Bona in Henry VI Part 3 in 1983. The excellent actor Anthony Pedley, who plays Ajax, also played Tranio in The Taming of the Shrew in 1980, Rodrigo in Othello, and Agrippa in Julius Caesar, both in 1981, and Junius Brutus in Coriolanus in 1984. Tony Stedman, who plays Aeneas, also played Montano in Othello in 1981. Peter Walmsley, who plays a servant to Troilus, also played an officer in Othello, also in 1981. Vernon Dobchev, who plays Agamemnon, also played the apothecary in Romeo and Juliet in 1978, Don John in Much Ado About Nothing in 1984, and Ronaldo in Mel Gibson's version of Hamlet in 1990. Geoffrey Chater, who plays Nestor, also played Brabantio in Othello, also in 1981. John Shrapnel, who plays Hector, also played Alcibiades in Timon of Athens in 1981, Kent in King Lear in 1982, and Duncan in Kenneth Branagh's version of Macbeth in 2013. Elaine Sherling, who plays Cassandra, also played Phrynia in Timon of Athens in 1981, and the goddess Diana in Pericles, Prince of Tyre in 1984. Benjamin Whitrow, who plays Ulysses, also played the unforgettable Mr. Bennet in the 1995 version of Pride and Prejudice, and Archbishop Warham in the Wolf Hall series. David Kinsey, who plays a servant to Paris, also plays the haberdasher in The Taming of the Shrew in 1980, and the jeweler in Timon of Athens in 1981. Cornelius Garrett, who plays Megarelon, also played a prisoner in Timon of Athens, also in 1981. And finally, Charles Gray, who plays Pandarus, also played Julius Caesar in 1978, the Duke of York in Richard II, and Solinus, the Duke of Ephesus, in the Comedy of Errors, both in 1983. You might also recognize him as the criminologist in the 1975 cult classic, The Rocky Horror Picture Show. Now, stay tuned for today's trivia challenge, which is called First Names. All right, now it's time for today's trivia challenge called First Names. Some Shakespeare characters are very well known by their last names, but they also have first names. What is the first name of each of the following Shakespeare characters? Number 1, Mistress Quickly in Henry IV, Part 2. Number 2, Bottom in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And number 3, Juliet's nurse in Romeo and Juliet. When we get back, I'll have the answers for you as well as some relevant lessons from Troilus and Cressida. Okay, now let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge called First Names. As I mentioned, some Shakespeare characters are very well known by their last name, but they also have first names. What is the first name of each of the following Shakespeare characters? Number 1, Mistress Quickly in Henry IV, Part 2. That would be Nell, which is possibly a nickname for Helen. Number 2, Bottom in A Midsummer Night's Dream. That would be Nick Bottom. And number 3, Juliet's nurse. In Romeo and Juliet, her first name is Angelica. Now let's wrap up with some relevant lessons from Troilus and Cressida. First, never put your own needs ahead of your customers. Paris was very selfish in stealing Menelaus's wife. His actions cost 7 years of death and destruction to both the Trojans and the Greeks. He never should have done it, and he alone satisfied his lust while those around him paid the price for it. Just like Henry VIII, his selfish lust cost untold thousands of innocent people to lose their lives. Second, don't rest on your laurels. Achilles grew lazy and unwilling to fight for his side, even though he was reputed to be the strongest Greek warrior. World chess champion Bobby Fischer was eventually stripped of his title because he refused to defend it. Remember, the price of greatness is responsibility. And finally, don't poke the bear. Hector taunted Achilles for being afraid to fight. Until that point, he was the undisputed strongest warrior in the Trojan army. And while it's true that he probably could have beaten Achilles in a fair fight, in the end, he lost because his opponent was not a man of honor. Sometimes it's best to let sleeping dogs lie. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you so much for watching this episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. Please join me next time when a rescued countess captivates a married king and creates quite a mess.